You're gone. There you are.
All right. This is starting. Okay. I think we're recording now.
I think we are too. I concur, sir.
All right. So, welcome to the show that has no name. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and this is my honored guest, Otto Excelsior. And Otto has some questions about Buddhist attitudes toward death or death ceremonies or some such, and he was going to ask them, and I will answer them for the benefit of the many.
Hooray. Yeah. Well, every culture, every society deals with the fact of death. We all know that we are all subject, obviously, to aging. This is not only unavoidable, it's normal, as is illness and as is death. And but this is of course a wonderful philosophical idea, and it's something that can really help you face death by keeping this in mind. But still, every culture has means of closure for people who have lost others, and I would think that Buddhism, like every other religion, is going to help provide this for lay people. So when somebody dies, what sort of attitude does Buddhism take toward how we deal with the corpse? Is there we know that the karma is going to be going off the person's aggregates. Well, we don't think that they stay permanent, right, and reincarnate in the next person, but that definitely that person is not there anymore. There's just the body. So what do we do with that body, and what's its importance?
Well, in Buddhism, usually monks especially are cremated, like in Burma where I lived. Monks and the parents of monks are cremated, but most other people are buried. And really, it's like I was sort of impressed by the stoicism of Burmese villagers with regard to a close family member dying. Every once in a while they'll have like really strong attachment and be really messed up and grieve for a long period of time. But other times it's like they're saying, well, that's Dhamma. It's like and really a devout Buddhist, especially a traditional Eastern one, doesn't believe that when you're dead, you're dead. It's like grandma's still, she just moved on to another existence.
Somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah, possibly a better one.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, there is that. But I've attended two monk funerals when I was in Burma, and then I attended two funerals for lay people in the Burmese tradition, like a Buddhist funeral, when I was in California, and every single one of them was very different from the other three. Like the one that I really was closest to was I was living in a monastery in like northwestern Burma with one other monk. He was about 80 years old, and he was bitten by a cobra and died. So it was like we did a Uposatha ceremony one day, and the next day he's dead, and then the next day after that he's just this little bowl of charred bone fragments and ashes.
Wow.
So that really struck me, just the very fact that you've got a person with desires and personality, and they've got likes and dislikes, and they have a sense of humor maybe, and all of a sudden, possibly within just a matter of minutes, it's just an it. So I mean, it seems really easy to understand how people very early on would believe that when you're dead is just unlikely, just because you've got all this complexity and vitality and so forth that it's just really hard to believe that it just poofs into nothing.
Right.
So I mean, there's that kind of belief is fairly strong. The Burmese still fear death, just partly because it's an animal instinct, and also in Buddhism, you really, there's no guarantees until you become a saint. Because it's like your last mental states are going to help condition what direction you're going in after death. So it may be that you have like really bad mental states as you're dying, which can kind of derail um, a lifelong accumulation of merit, at least in part. Still, I mean, the merit doesn't go away, but
Right. But that affects a great deal.
yeah. So there is that. But with regard to the funeral, it was it was kind of strange that like I didn't see anybody really cry until the actual cremation began. I mean, his family were, they just accepted it as just, well, this has happened. Now we're going to do this,
Right.
and so they were like, I think it was sons or nephews came and they washed the body and got him all ready, and they set up a little table with some of his favorite stuff there, just in case the spirit was still lingering, it could enjoy the stuff. Also, they put this little lattice of bamboo sticks on his near his body, like on the bed or the bier next to him.
Right.
And I didn't know what it was, so I asked, "What is that?" And they said it's a ladder. So it's like the stairway to heaven or something. They put this little
Interesting.
symbolic ladder
Wow.
to the body. And
Fascinating.
then the next day was when they had the cremation. And a bunch of monks showed up, and I wanted the funeral to be, in the afternoon because it was just blazing hot. It was like the hottest time of the hot season. So
Right.
they had to cremate him pretty fast because,
Yeah. Yeah.
heat goes bad pretty fast in
Yeah.
hot weather.
Yeah. Yeah.
But still, I wanted to wait until it kind of cooled down a little.
Right.
And the village monks just wanted it over with so they could go home they go back to the monastery as quick as
Yeah.
possible.
Get it over with. Yeah.
Yeah, so they do the chanting, and one of them gives a sermon, and then the people hand out little envelopes of money and other things, and I didn't participate in that part.
Of course. No. No. Not yet.
Yeah, I just kind of I didn't want to make problems, so I didn't really say much, but anyway, then after that, they started like beating, like it was like a drum, and then his male relatives picked up like the stretcher that he was lying on and started like doing this snake thing through the monastery, like figure eights and so forth, with the bells and gongs and the drums beating. And this is when the women started crying finally. And then they go out to the shore next to the river, like the riverbank, which was right next to the monastery. And the wood was already accumulated there, and they he was in like a little coffin thing at first. So forget the stretcher. Now I'm remembering it was a coffin kind of box that he was in. And they took his clothes off and then just dumped him naked face down onto the top of the thing. And I remember just saying in English, "That's undignified." I mean, it just seemed like so wrong. Like they wanted to take his clothes off, not to waste the monk's robes. They wanted to keep that as like a keepsake or something. But just flopping him face down naked on top of the funeral pyre was,
Wow.
yeah. And then so they lit that, and then before it was all the way burned, they started throwing buckets of water onto it just so that there'd be some kind of bones or something left over that they could enshrine. And somebody designed a little pagoda. I wanted the pagoda to be in the monastery grounds, but there was some village monks who were like senior to me that nixed that idea because it's supposedly the Burmese monks do not really like to have human remains on monastery property. It's sort of like desecrating it or somehow defiling it or something. But really, if you read the Buddhist texts, then it's more appropriate to have decomposing corpses lying around than having flower beds and so forth.
Right.
So yeah, that was the main funeral that I went to, and yeah, I was there from start to finish on that one.
Let me
And
ask you about that. The ladder. That the first thing I think of is shamanism. This sounds like something Mircea Eliade or Mircea Eliade would have described as, a way to climb up. Is this Buddhist, or is this like a local Burmese tradition?
I think it was just a Burmese tradition because I'd never read anything about it in the Pali texts.
And is that the same with like going dancing in like serpentine
Yeah,
clay?
I mean that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that.
Wow. Wow.
So some
Interesting.
of it's just Burmese tradition, just local tradition that may extend back for centuries, for all I know.
That's how Vajrayana got its start. The
Uh,
local traditions start creeping into Buddhism, and the next thing you know, you've got
yeah,
multiple Buddhas and Yab Yum and
yeah. And then also there was one other ceremony I went to, a cremation ceremony. That was my teacher. And my father had died within just a few weeks of that.
oh
So I
wow,
figured I couldn't go to his funeral because I was in Burma, he was in America. So I went to my teacher's funeral and was sure to go to that. And it was just a big deal. It lasted like a week. You know, it was he was a relatively famous monk. And so it was like a sort of like a festival going on. And there were people chanting just nonstop the whole week in like relays. You know, there'd be this group of young village ladies wearing the brown sarong and the white blouse and the brown scarf with their hair up, and then then there'd be monks that would be chanting after that, and maybe some other group chanting after that. And again, it was like nobody really started crying until the actual cremation was starting, where this one they didn't use wood. I mean, more famous monks, they'll get like this, it looks like a royal barge kind of a thing, and it's got like propane gas or something that burns
really?
the body. Yeah.
Wow.
So I
It's
was I
so
was one of the
the
pallbearers for that one
oh
at
wow.
the beginning, but so many people were like just sort of jostling and shouldering, trying to get in so they could help carry it, that I just backed out. It wasn't really that important to me.
Right, right.
And he has my teacher now has sort of like a little pagoda enshrining his remains on at the monastery.
Nice, nice. Now,
Yeah.
is there a particular structure to the funeral of like a senior monk like that or a famous monk?
I would assume that there's going to be variations. You know, it's just mainly just sort of a religious, a lot of chanting, the occasional sermon, you know,
Right.
and and then just the cremation. And it's I remember when the body was being taken to the cremation area, all the monks were chanting about impermanence, just one of the standard Pali verses about impermanence, you know, how everything that has a beginning also has an end, and death will claim us all, and this sort of thing, which is standard Buddhism. Recollection of death is considered to be one of the great protectors.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, that impermanence was the first thing I thought of when you were describing about, being with the 80-year-old monk one day, and then, 3 days, a couple of days later, there's a bowl of ashes, and it's like
Yeah.
human right
Yeah,
there.
first it's a he, and then it's just like 24 hours later, it's just an it, just this body, and then 24 hours after that is just bone fragments and
Yeah.
ashes in a
Yeah.
bowl. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the convention. As far as I know, it's never been rescinded in English that a corpse is referred to as it, not he or she. When the
yeah,
spirit, if you read Shakespeare, it's you see that it's he or she before death, and once it's a corpse, it's an it, sort of thing. So
yeah. Well, babies are it too, so
they can be, they can
yeah,
be very much. It depends on what trimester, but we won't go there today.
yeah.
So now in America, how did obviously they were restricted by they're working with an American funeral codes and
Yeah. Certainly, you're not going to be able to cremate a body on monastery grounds or anything like that without maybe a whole slew of permits that you got to get or something. But yeah, this because I was a monk living in a monastery, a Burmese monastery in California, we got called on to at least I got called to at least two funerals, and I was just kind of I was just kind of in a strange mood one time, and I'm just kind of spacing out and getting kind of bored. And then somebody in the audience would start crying, and then I realized that there was a coffin with an open casket with a corpse right behind me, you know.
wow, wow,
And it was just pretty much a Western style. It was this little Chinese looking guy wearing a really nice suit and looking very healthy, you know, with
right,
makeup on and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
So it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the standard American or Western sort of denial of death.
right, right,
And
yeah,
the other one, it was I remember um, that one, there was one of, I think it was possibly the daughter of the old guy who had died, just having a complete meltdown and flinging herself over the casket and wailing and this sort of thing. Which, yeah, I suppose the people at the funeral home, I mean, they have to remain somber. You know, they
Right.
can't really get annoyed or anything, but they're probably got like, oh boy, here she goes.
Right.
Let's just get this over with.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now,
But there, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask when you mentioned the when your teacher was cremated and they had a special propane powered portable crematorium. I was just wondering, was this a sealed container or was he open to the air when he was cremated? Could you like see the guy?
If you stepped up onto the thing, you could look down and yeah, you could see what was there.
So it was like an open cremation still, but he was in a box or casket.
Yeah, it was sort of like a box shaped thing that had, if I remember correctly, it had an open top, and then it had like the flame jets kind of pointing downwards and underneath.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful in a certain sense. I mean.
Yeah, I would have preferred wood though. I mean, wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More traditional.
Yeah, it was kind of disappointing that it was just some sort of propane apparatus that they were.
Well, if you think about it from a from a traditional culture's point of view, I mean, it's like magic flame. I mean, there was evidence of fire worship in ancient Persia, and it's these are like natural gas jets. That's not really that much different from a propane jet, So I don't know, but
Yeah.
I want to ask when you're as a monk, if you're called to a funeral, what's your job there? Like when you went to that, whether Western or Eastern, I guess, but what's when they call a monk, we've had a death, there's a funeral going on. What's the monk do?
Mostly they chant, and then usually a senior monk will deliver a sermon, generally on impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
And like the word for a funeral in Burmese is athuba, which is the Burmese pronunciation of the Pali word asuba, which means something like impure or like repulsive or something like that, which is it's like a reflection on impurity and impermanence and suffering and that kind of a thing.
Right.
Although, I mean, the people in Asia, Indians and Burmese and Chinese and so forth, they're very much into veneration of ancestors.
Right.
And like the whole idea of hungry ghosts originally came from ancestors that didn't have offerings made.
Yeah.
Their descendants weren't like offering to them, so that's why they were hungry, because they weren't receiving the offerings. So there's still a lot of that in Asia, and it's a big deal in Burma. I mean, I really can't speak for Thailand because I didn't spend much time there, or other Buddhist countries. But in Burma, at the time a person dies, their family will come to the monastery and make offerings, and then share the merit with the spirit to kind of, ease its transition, maybe improve the odds of it going upwards instead of downwards, kind of a thing.
Right.
And then periodically after that, I don't remember the exact time periods, but it's it's X number of weeks after that. And then, there's like the year anniversary, and then it's like 3 years and 5 years or whatever. I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they will come back to the monastery, and again, they'll make offerings on behalf of the deceased ancestor.
That's interesting because I mean I can see traces of like the older beliefs in ancestor worship where the ancestors were in the next world, you propitiated them, they gave you good luck in return. But as Buddhists, they must know that the person they've lost is now living another life. So when they dedicate this merit to them, it's like they're helping them along in their next life. Helping them does that can that really help them overcome past karma or give them some kind of it just seems so nice to you're not with us anymore, we know you're living another life, it's been years later, but here we're still helping you along.
Yeah, I used to think about that, because according to Buddhism, I mean, you can't really transmit merit to somebody else. So the only way it can work, I mean, they're just taking a gamble, You know, it's a relatively low percentage that it's going to work, but still they're doing it anyway. I mean, like in Christianity, it's supposedly a low percentage that you're going to get into heaven, you know, according to the Bible, but everyone just acts like, you know,
Right.
everyone that they like is going to heaven. And
Right.
so it's kind of like that with this, that actually the sharing of merit to a deceased person only works if the deceased person's spirit is present and can actually, you know, is actually aware of what's going on. So
Ah.
if they've already, you know, entered a womb
Right.
somewhere, you know, then, you know, they're gestating, they're not going to be aware of what's going
Oh,
on.
really?
So it's what happened. The way you share merit is you do a meritorious deed, and then you know you share the merit with all beings, especially the ancestor, but you know all beings. And then if there's any beings that are aware of that and are happy about that, then their happiness is what's giving them the merit. You know, they're like rejoicing over your act of merit, which then is meritorious for them.
Ah, but so that only under certain circumstances, though, are they going to directly benefit.
Yeah, because I mean, you pretty much have to be reborn as like a ghost-like being. Like if you're a human, then you're going to be an embryo. You know, you're not
Right.
going to be aware of it. If you're in heaven, then you're really not going to be interested in the dirty little mess down here. You know, you're going to have celestial gardens and stuff that's going to be
Right.
much
What's this
more pleasant.
down there? That's the human world. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Or if you're in, you know, if you go to hell, obviously, you know, you're not going to be able to rejoice in much of anything. You're not going to be able to see what's going on. So it's only those who are like in some kind of spirit realm that are actually able to attend the ceremony and see what's going on. And then they have to rejoice at the act of merit. And then that helps them. So that's like the strict, hard-nosed Theravada Buddhist explanation of how it works.
Huh. Interesting. So that's also maintaining traditional ideas about ghosts attending their own funerals, and because again, I'm thinking in terms like you were saying about the original ancestor worship, and how they were able to, once you accept reincarnation, that's going to kind of throw a spanner into that. You know, you can't
Yeah.
have like your ancestor, the great whatever founder of your line, sitting there, sending you good juju, if that he's already been reborn several dozen
He
times.
could be a mailman or something in some other country right now.
Yeah, yeah. So, oh, very interesting.
Yeah,
So,
so I mean there is that just the whole ancestor veneration thing. That's it was common in the West also, probably universal in humans for a while. Partly just because of what I was saying earlier, how it's so hard to believe. You know, if that, you know, somebody that you know personally, they got the personality and everything,
yeah,
they're there, and then just maybe a few minutes later, you know, it's just this it lying there. So obviously something is missing, and that something missing had to have gone somewhere else. It doesn't just like disintegrate into nothingness. Or
right,
at least it's sort of counterintuitive to believe that.
right.
So there is that. But in Buddhism, yeah, it's like it's a whole different attitude, yet the older attitude is still there in a kind of vestigial form.
Hmm. Well, I don't know if you can hear that. Somebody's playing music really loudly here. I hope that's not.
No, I didn't notice.
All right, I can ignore it. I think it's the bar next door, but I could try closing the windows if that gets to be a problem. Um, Now, when you've got, actually, my first thought was Julian Jaynes, because he talks a lot about, Jaynesian theory of the bicameral mind is that, the the fact that we have ancestor worship and veneration of ancestors stems from the fact that, like you say, these personalities are very, very powerful to us, and in the old days we would still hear their voices in our minds, literally. So there was they were talking about the Chinese had a system where they had like two funerals, and they'd have the one funeral where they would like place the deceased in a tomb, set up all sorts of offering tables and stuff like that, and they'd go and visit. And then after a certain amount of time, the idea, from a Jaynesian perspective, is you would just hear the voice less and less because other concerns would come up. You'd have another head of the family, another chief, whatever. His voice would be the one you hear when you're off doing tasks. He would tell you well, go build that building there, and you'd hear the voice, go build the building there. So so the voice faded of the other person, and then when that faded, they would just take the body and toss it out on the garbage heap, kind of like dump. That's what I thought of when you're talking about, you know, dumping the guy on the pyre face first. When they could no longer hear the voice, they so they really didn't consider the body itself to be important, except as a vehicle of the spirit, or the ego, or the self, or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
But
and then it's like, I've read like the Hindus, I mean, they tend to cremate their dead, partly because of the idea that a lot of people are very attached to their body and identify with their body. And so by cremating the body, it makes it more likely that the spirit can move on instead of just like haunting a graveyard for, 50 years or whatever.
yeah, I've heard stories of that in an Asian context where a spirit can be confused and try to hang around its own body. So I
Yeah.
can see where that would be, a good cure for that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. We were talking earlier about, you were saying that it's the monks who are cremated in the Buddhist tradition, and the regular people, the lay people, buried. And we were talking about in India where cremation was common, except for certain groups, including Saivite yogis, who would be buried sitting upright like a lingam, And
Yeah.
there was the account of the Suti, of the yogini. She was also a Saivite, and they would have these couples that would go and explore the mystic path of Yabyum and so forth all their lives. And when her yogi died, they set him upright in the grave, and she sat in his lap in the traditional Yabyum yoga position, and just had them bury them both alive, or with him dead and her alive, and her just holding her hand up, making a rotary motion with her finger, and they would just go around the hole and just fill it in slowly, and they say right up till it covered her finger. Just keep going. But I mean, for her, it was, excuse me, her death was a mystical act that she entered into. And
Yeah. Also a liminal act, I assume.
yes, very much so, even in that culture and time.
Yeah.
But
So I've read that there are some sort of dark side Hindus. I don't know if they'd be worshippers of Kali or maybe Shiva, who actually live in cemeteries and occasionally feed on corpses, and they'll be eating the offerings put out for the dead and this sort of thing. And I assume that that is largely just liminal. It's sort of wrecking norms and breaking
right.
taboos, and thereby, like in the book, the Trickster and the Paranormal, it's just sort of ripping this hole in this established normality that will allow some kind of juju to come through.
Yeah. That's, I think, at the heart of a lot of the tantra that they have in India. As I understand it, I mean, you've got ceremonies which are designed to break taboos specifically. And of course, the idea being, of course, that you're taking this energy and transforming it. It's not simply to, do degenerate behavior, or, for sense pleasure, but with the idea of tapping this liminal power, or the power of liminality, of being in that never land.
Plus, to some degree, just bombarding yourself with just really outrageous situations and just learning to be like calm with that or something. Like in Theravada Buddhism, there are 13 optional ascetic practices that monks can follow. One is the cemetery dwellers practice, and I did that a little bit. And each Dhutanga has 3 different levels. It's like easy, medium, and hard. And the hard level of the cemetery dwellers practice is you have to be living in a part of the cemetery where you can hear people crying and lamenting.
Wow. This
Yeah.
sounds like a great way for really intense, quick consciousness alteration. I mean, this is really going to open up parts of your brain. So what was your experience with that practice?
Well, I didn't have access to people crying and lamenting at cemeteries. And the cemeteries is in the Buddhist time, there were what were called charnel grounds or charnel fields, where it was just really poor people would just be flung out onto the ground to decompose and be eaten by animals.
Right.
And they don't really have that anymore in Burma, although cemeteries in Burma are still, I mean, they're not like a golf course or a park like they are in the West. It's just brambles and bushes and vines and snakes and lizards and stuff.
Wow.
And the poor people are buried in shallow graves. And, after a few years, there's no sign that anyone was buried there. And then a few years later, somebody else is buried in the same spot, and the grave diggers just find bones. They'll just toss them aside. So you can find, human bones lying around.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, there's usually like a little pavilion at a cemetery where people can sit and, that's where the funeral ceremonies might take place and so forth. So monks can just find one of these places and just sleep in the pavilion. So there's one town, I think it's Kani, the town of Kani in northwestern Burma. Every time I went there, there was this really nice cemetery with lots of bones around and stuff, and I would just stay there when I was in town.
Right. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm getting an important alert here. Oh.
Not a tornado warning, I hope.
No, not around here. We did just have some interesting storms there. So, did you sleep in a pavilion then?
Yeah.
Oh, and how
Yeah,
long?
when I would be staying in a cemetery, usually I just stay in the little shelter building there. It's just like sort of a raised platform and then posts holding up a thatched roof and no walls usually. Keeps you
So,
off the ground and keeps
was
you
it
away
some?
from the
Was it
snake.
something you did intermittently, or would you like stay for like long periods of time, just do your alms rounds and stuff from the cemetery, or?
Well, the only long-term stuff I did along those lines is somebody did donate to me a human skeleton once that they bought from a medical school.
I
And so,
remember I've
yeah,
got that image of you with the skeleton
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. So I just had it for a while. I had it sitting in like the lotus posture, like meditative posture out in front of the cave, partly to discourage visitors, but some visitors would just come to look at the skeleton.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But meditating on death is it's very important in like Theravada Buddhist texts. It's really been downplayed, sort of like in Christianity, gather not up your treasures on the earth, upon the earth has been downplayed. Just all the contemplations of death and
Oh yeah.
contemplations of decomposing corpses and so forth is very much down. It's receives very little emphasis nowadays.
It's very odd because it is also very much a part of the Western tradition. I think of the Capuchin monks, who up until very recently were required to keep a skull with them, usually of another brother. And I think they were the ones who made using skeletons as architectural or at least ornamental elements.
Yeah, the Memento Mori was, I mean, like in the Middle Ages, if you had a feast, there'd be like a skull on the table just as a reminder to everybody. But the thing is once you've seen it 500 times, it's sort of like a picture on the wall.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just stops really having an effect on you.
There is that, and I would also say that at least compared to our lifestyle and what we're used to, the usual person living in downtown medieval Europe probably had a lot more reminders of death all around him or her than we do. Certainly between public executions and the condition of graveyards and people just dying. I mean, even in into the Renaissance, you read in Shakespeare's time, Johnson and Decker, their plays, references to bodies floating in the rivers and
Yeah.
the famous graveyard scene in Hamlet. We were talking about that earlier. So, yeah, no. But also, I think I remember now, before I forget, I believe it was in Herodotus or possibly Herodotus, who talked about how the Egyptians would have a feast, and they would have somebody bring along a small coffin with a replica of a mummified person inside of it, with the same idea of like going around to the feast and showing it to each person, say, "This is where you're going. This is where you're going. This is where you're going."
Yeah.
So very, very old tradition. I don't know what happened to us, but we got so squeamish all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, I think it's partly I mean, to some degree, it was just the loss of religion in the West, where I don't know. I think it's more in Europe than in America that just believe when you're dead, you're dead. Is that's all there is, and so it's scarier maybe, unless people think that they're going to go to hell. It's scarier for.
I think reincarnation is scarier than annihilationism. Really, I mean, if
Yeah,
you
I mean,
accept annihilationism, you're just not going to care ultimately. But if you, I
yeah,
mean,
just an animal instinct though, with
isn't
nothing
it?
really to really
Oh
what do you,
yeah, there's that, of course. But I was thinking of now is, to me, one of the scariest things about reincarnation is being a helpless infant again. And isn't that one of there's like five messengers? Is it the five messengers, David messengers that were sent, like an old person, an ill person, a person who was in prison, a person who was like just a baby lying in its own.
actually, I think it was four. There were four messenger, four divine.
Okay, four.
Yeah, it was a sick person, an old person, a dead person, and then finally it was a monk or a religious mendicant renunciant. At least
No, those two are the ones that the Buddha saw. But what
yeah.
wasn't there another something the Buddha said that Deva sent like five messengers? And you're the expert. I'll have to look this up. I seem to remember reading somewhere, and it was
It
like
could
similar
be
to
that there is a sutta that mentions that. But
yeah. It was originally. I mean, it also mentioned those guys that woke up the Buddha, but then there was the criminal being tortured and a baby lying in its own vomit and feces and urine,
yeah,
representing karma catching up with you immediately, because you can that the instant karma does happen sometimes, and also the helplessness of rebirth, because you just don't know what's going to happen to you. And especially at that time, a lot of babies were exposed or grew up, and to this day a lot of children are raised in terrible circumstances,
yeah,
and survive infancy. So but to me, that's a lot scarier than just annihilationism. I remember when, one of the things is like, I remember saying to somebody, I hope reincarnation isn't true, because I'd hate to have to go through being a little baby again. And
yeah,
that
yeah.
helps.
I used to say that I hope that the Jehovah's Witnesses were right because they don't believe in hell. So if you're not good enough to make the cut and spend the rest of eternity picking fruits and vegetables and going on picnics and hugging large wild animals, that you just get poofed out of existence. So I
Oh, is
hope.
that what happens? Just poofed out of existence?
Mhm.
You just get poofed out of existence
Yeah,
for
yeah, the
the.
bad people that don't make the cut, they're
So
not
it
the.
is annihilationism then, basically.
Yeah, I suppose so.
You either get a reward
So
or nothing, or you're just let
yeah,
go.
yeah, I can see your point. It's obviously, I mean, um, what happens to you after death should be no more frightening than what happened to you before you were born.
There is that thought too.
Yeah.
Although you do have the karma you've created during that life, so that when you die, it is going to be different on that level.
Yeah, so if you've
So
done more good than bad, then you can be fairly confident. I mean, there's no guarantees, but just from the Buddhist point of view or even a Hindu point of view, um, you can be fairly confident that if you are more good than bad in this life, that you're going to be in a better situation in your next one.
and of course, and you mentioned it earlier, your mind state at the moment of death is very important. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that determines like your bearing, what direction you're going to be facing, um, you know, after death. And that's why Mahatma Gandhi, when he got shot, he said, "Hey Ram," it wasn't like, "Oh God, they got me," like in the movie. It was like he wanted his mind focused on God as he died, just so that would, help him after death, by having his last conscious thought on this planet focused on God.
right, like
But
the
I mean, still, I mean, all of your other karma isn't just overruled. It's like, let's say you live a really good life, and then let's say you got really bad mental states just right at the moment of death. And
anger
I
and
mean, that
whatever.
can cause you to be, you wind up in like a ghost realm or something, but all of your good karma is going to mitigate that, and it won't last very long, and it'll be a relatively good situation, and then you move on from that.
Right.
Or it's like an alternatively that you can be like a really bad person and then you die in a really good mental state so that you wind up in a relatively good state. Maybe you get born as some prince or something, but then of course you're going to be the prince gone bad and you're just going to mess things up even worse. And You'd be like Hunter Biden or something.
Right, right, yeah, yeah. Huh. And I know too that you can always. I'm remembering a story I remember about. I'm trying to pull this out of my tiny little mind. I think he was called Finger Mala or something like that, about a bandit.
Oh, Angulimala.
Mala, yeah, yeah, a guy that had killed all these people, did all this wickedness, and reformed, and he was basically able to become an arhat, right?
Yeah, he became fully enlightened.
And people weren't happy about that because, well, he killed my uncle. So
Yeah.
what?
He was wearing his finger around his
Yeah,
neck.
yeah. But why isn't he going to a hell realm? But wait a minute, this sort of deal.
Yeah, and then like the Buddha's, his left-hand man, Mahamoggallana, he was murdered. I mean, he was fully enlightened, but still he was beaten to a pulp, literally. So there was no bone unbroken in his body. And that was due to some bad karma that he had in a previous existence.
Wow.
But he used psychic powers to escape twice, and then he remembered the past life and realized that it was just the fruition of karma. So the third time he just let them beat him up. And then Devadatta, who's sort of like the Buddhist equivalent of Judas Iscariot, he's like in the lowest pits of hell right now for trying to murder the Buddha, but he is destined to become a Pacceka Buddha. So, a zillion gajillion years in the future, he's going to be a fully enlightened being, not like a Samma Buddha, but he's going to be like a hermit Buddha.
Right.
So he'll be higher than just an ordinary run-of-the-mill enlightened being.
Well, I would have liked to heard the story from his point of view, to tell you the truth. Wasn't there a Devadatta monastery? Some Chinese travelers described. They honored all the Buddhas except that Gautama guy. It's like, not him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be that Judas Iscariot also might be just getting a bad rap because they have to, every myth or archetype, you have to have like the villain that's making trouble for the good guy or something,
Right, right.
So it's possible that, Devadatta, he wanted Buddhism to be stricter. He wanted Buddhists to be vegetarian, and he wanted them to wear only rag robes and never accept invitations to houses and this sort of thing. And the Buddha said, no, that's all optional. If you don't want to eat meat, you don't have to, but he's going to make a rule requiring people to be vegetarian, that sort of thing, requiring monks to be vegetarian.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe he wasn't all that bad. He just wound up being a troublemaker because he was too much of a zealot or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, immediately what springs to my mind is, well, he could have done all those things. Why does he have to force the other monks? And I can also see something you brought up before about the middle path at that time. That this was a middle path between some really amazingly hard austerities that people were practicing at that time.
Yeah, the Ajivikas would just sneer at the Buddhists and call them shaven-headed householders.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Just
they were allowed to wear shoes.
What they're not eating like fruit that's dropped from the tree and rotted for a while.
Yeah.
Why don't they just start?
They're actually eating food that was specially prepared for them.
Which
was strictly forbidden to like Jain ascetics, for example.
I was going to say, Devadatta could have become a Jain or something if he really wanted to, go whole renunciation.
Yeah.
But no, I always thought of him as like, I guess since he had his own monastery or possibly his own school, you could call him a heresiarch.
Yeah, it's possible.
Heresiarch, yeah. So,
according to the texts, his heresy or his schism, it died out pretty quickly. But it's hard to say exactly.
Well, I was just came across. I was watching those videos by your compadre there from the Ajahn there. What's his?
Ajahn Punadamo?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. And he was talking about how there was a time when all these different Buddhist schools, they would all be in the same monastery, attend the same meetings. They just had all these different beliefs, but they didn't consider that it wasn't like, Protestantism where it's like, here's an Anglican and here's a Calvinist and, separate. They were just all like, well, we just agree to disagree sort of thing. Just have different interpretations.
Yeah, to some degree, like the University of Nalanda was a huge monastery, But it was like each school had its own compound, and they would do their ceremonies separately.
Right. But they could all live together, and they weren't trying to, like, why?
Yeah, aside from the
They would
form,
argue with each other to try to convert each other to their ideas.
yeah, well, I mean, they would debate that kind of thing.
Right.
But aside from formal acts of the Sangha, where they would do their own separately, yeah, everything else was pretty much communal. But I think we're drifting away from death.
We are. We're drifting far away. Well, excuse me.
We're all dead now.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the time you spent spending time living in graveyards, or at least for short periods of time. Are there monks that actually do this full time, or are there monks that are pursuing that path that you know of in Burma?
Yeah, I met one monk who was considered to be an arahant, and he lived in what was called a cemetery, but it was just a few graves over on one side of the compound where he was living. Also, I went to a monastery down in Mon State that was very strict, and they just had mummified corpses all over the place. Like up on a bookshelf, there you'd find like this mummified human foot up there among the books. And
Wow.
I had a friend who grew up in that town, and he said when he was a kid, he and his brother and sister would go out and dig up fresh corpses and offer them to the monastery. And then
Oh,
they'd
wow.
have this system where they'd bind them in ropes so that they wouldn't bloat until they were kind of dried out enough, and then they could take
Oh,
them
wow.
and put them in like display cases. And it was really a very depressing place because there was, in addition to the corpses, there was just like mold and garbage and stuff everywhere. It just was not a really good system. But I did take seriously the idea that monks were supposed to contemplate corpses. And so I did attend a few autopsies
Ah.
when at the Mandalay City morgue, which
Ah.
was, I mean, that was kind of an interesting story because I wanted to see corpses, or I
Right.
wanted to see an autopsy,
Right.
and so we went to the morgue, and the only guy there when we got there, a friend of mine who was also a monk, he was just like sweeping the floor or something. He just let us in. It's people at the bottom and people at the top really don't have much to fear, but the people in the middle, like the low class bureaucrats and so forth, they're afraid to do anything unusual because their head goes on the chopping block if they make a mistake. And so this guy was too low on the totem pole to really be afraid. So he just, waved us in. And I remember just looking. That's the first time I'd ever seen. Well, I went to the burning ghats in Benares. I had the first dead people I ever saw. I had to go look for them. I'd never attended a funeral or anything like that as a layman. So the first actual corpses that I saw were at the burning ghats in Benares where they were being cremated. And that was a story all to itself. But then I went to the morgue, Mandalay City morgue, and I was barefoot, and there's like puddles of pink goo on the floor.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
gotta like carefully walk around those, and
Right.
like half the guys there had been stabbed in the guts. I think that's the preferred form of murder in a country where you don't have firearms or
Right.
whatever. He's just being stabbed in the belly. And there was some little old lady there, and we went into the cooler, and there was a couple of dead babies on racks, and one like a teenage girl lying there just half naked. And as soon as you realize what you're looking at, you just kind of have to look away.
Yeah.
It's the male mind is so weird. And then
Yeah.
so I turned around, looked the other way, and there was a guy lying on the floor who had obviously undergone a full autopsy. I mean, he looked like he swallowed a hand grenade, you know.
Wow.
And the weird thing for me was like one guy lying on our table had like a fly crawling on his face.
Right.
And I was just thinking, I mean, even if you're dead, man, you should at least be going like, get
Yeah.
back
Yeah. Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
So we went to the coroner to ask permission to see autopsies, and he was just saying it was just the standard Burmese. It's called anade in Burma, where it's considered to be rude to say no. So you either say, well, that'd be really hard for you. You try and talk them out, or else you just pass the buck. So he says, well, you have to have permission from the medical superintendent,
Right.
the CEO of the hospital, apparently.
Right.
So we went to the medical superintendent, And we weren't even able to meet him. It's just his secretary just says, well, you're going to have to get permission from the governor. And that's
My
just
goodness.
essentially saying, no way in hell you're going to see an autopsy. But
Right.
it's not polite to say no. So they
Yeah.
just pass the buck and say, if you get permission from the governor. So just through karmic coincidence, I was staying at a big school monastery at the time near Mandalay, and who came to visit the monastery like a week later, but the governor himself, and
Oh
he
my
was friends with the abbot of the monastery. So,
God.
I asked the abbot, I mean, can you get permission for me to see an autopsy? And so he did. And it was like just a week later, I just finished lunch and some hospital car pulls up and says, "All right, sir, come on. You're going to see an autopsy." And
Oh
I'm
wow.
thinking, I'm starting to have second thoughts. It's like, well, I just ate lunch. I've never seen an autopsy
Oh
before.
wow.
I don't
Wow.
want to be like blowing grits all over.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So anyway, we did go and see the autopsy, and I have a degree in biology. Really, I mean, it was just fascinating for me. It wasn't really.
Right.
I mean, still, I mean, you get samvega or this feeling of spiritual urgency. It's really hitting you over the head that as am I, so is he. As he is, so I will be, kind of a thing. But yeah, the coroner said, yeah, if you're not satisfied, just come again. I'll let you see another one. So I came back, and he obviously was just being polite again. And
Right.
after the second one, he just took my friend aside and just like pleaded with him never ever to come back ever again. So
Wow.
we saw two autopsies.
What was
It was thorough. He didn't even have to take the brain out or anything, but he did it just to oblige me.
uh what did the abbot think when you asked him to do that? Did he react to that or?
He was kind of amazed because it's really not a Burmese thing. The Burmese are kind of afraid of ghosts and they're really squeamish about dead bodies and that sort of thing. But I mean, he knew the scriptures,
Yeah, yeah.
so he knew what monks are encouraged to do. So I mean, he went ahead and did it. He was kind of taken aback at first, but he went ahead and
Well,
fixed it up for me.
so probably helped earn you something of a reputation in Burma.
Yeah, there were actually the second time I went, there was like two or three other monks wanted to come with me too. They thought it was a good idea.
Huh. Well, so perhaps you've started a trend.
Yeah, maybe a very short-lived one.
I was going to say the poor governor suddenly getting petitions from all these monks. Hey, we
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah, I tried it in America too, but yeah, that went over like a lead zeppelin.
Right, right. Well, when you went to the Ghats, the burning Ghats, were you already a monk then?
Yeah, yeah, I was a very junior monk at the time. I just made it to Asia and hadn't been to Burma yet. And that was weird because it's like, for starters, you got these little funeral piles. They just use enough wood to burn the corpse because there's not a whole heck of a lot of firewood in like Benares, India. So they just these maybe four or five funeral pyres going at the same time. And there's like the kids of the corpse burners are like running around giggling, playing tag and this sort of thing. They're just used to it. And
Right.
then I'm standing there watching a corpse burn, and these giggling little kids just run past me. It's just like this strange incongruity. And then there's like the water buffalo just walking between the corpses, eating the flowers that have fallen off the
Wow.
ears,
Wow.
um, and it was like when the legs, like the bare feet are sticking out. You got these brown bare feet sticking out of the fire, and then when the knee joints burn all the way through. The corpse burners just flip the feet over, and they're bending the wrong way. It's like,
Yeah.
and that is just so weird. It's like that really struck me. That was one of the strongest impressions I got was the people's legs, like is just bending the wrong way. And
Yeah.
then also, after a while, they would take the stick and break the skull open, and then the brains would just flop out like scrambled eggs and start sizzling in the fire. And
Wow.
I'm sort of a head-oriented kind of person, so that was a strong impression on me also.
Yeah. 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 Amazing. Well, certainly when we see a body, I mean, we know intellectually that it is a corpse, but it's a human form.
Yeah.
And we see the human form being put through things. We have that. I guess it's partly compassion, but that we identify. We think, oh,
Yeah.
when you see somebody like famous videos of like a ball player where the baseball catches him in the cup and he's not wearing a cup, and it's like everybody goes, oh. So yeah, I actually I remember seeing a video of this was like years ago, and it was when they were developing those robots that go on four legs, so they kind of look like robotic dogs or something, and they're
Yeah.
used in China now to enforce lockdowns and things. But I remember they were demonstrating, and it was like a demonstration film for like the Army or the Air Force or something they're trying to sell it to. And they were showing how well the robot could balance. And at one point, they're showing it's running this and that. Then one of the workers comes up to show them how well it works and kicks it. And I remember going, oh, wait, it's a robot. But because it has the form of an animal, and it's the same thing, with a corpse, when you see a corpse, I imagine getting over that is an important part of like working in the corpse burner field, or the field of any kind of mortuary science or something like that. I imagine after a while.
Yeah, well, obviously the corpse burners, it didn't cause them to lose their sensual desires because they had all those giggling kids running around.
Yeah. Many
I
of them.
assume the same is true of coroners. They might do an autopsy on some beautiful young girl, and then it doesn't cause them to have any less lust for their wife when they get home.
Right. But isn't that an exercise of to take the body apart? I forget how many parts the body is supposed to have officially.
Supposedly 32.
32, yeah. And they're like a 33rd secret part that they don't.
The brain. For some reason, the brain is not on the list.
So yeah, you're supposed to like just disassemble the body in your mind, and that's supposed to help you remove.
Well, it's one of the 40 standard meditation objects is the parts of the body, and then so it starts off head, hair, body, hair, nails, teeth, skin. So you meditate on that for like the first week, head, hair, body, hair, nails, teeth, skin, and you're like visualizing what each part looks like. And then like the second week you do the same in reverse. And then the third week you do it forwards and backwards. And then the next week after that you do the next 5.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's supposed to be good for reducing lust. Although again, I've got a degree in biology, and the human body is just kind of a miracle to me. So it doesn't, I'm not really grossed out by guts. I mean, you can watch a gory movie where they try to make it as icky as possible, and then you can get kind of grossed out. But just the idea of it being in there, or
Right.
just the idea of the soft rounded curves of a female are caused by this subcutaneous adipose tissue that looks sort of like partially melted Velveeta cheese.
Yeah.
But still nice.
And like you said about like having the skull all the time on the table, after a while it's not working as a memento mori anymore. It's just something that you tune out.
Yeah, it doesn't really cause samvega or a spiritual urgency.
Right. Give me that Velveeta, you just kind of get over to.
Yeah.
But well, getting back a little more to what we were supposedly originally talking to. So if a monk is called into a funeral, how much organizing of the funeral do the monks do, or do the monks just come in, do their bit, and go out, or do they help organize the funeral? Is there a? I'm trying to see if there's like a structure to it. And again, I'm thinking in terms of like from a social standpoint, closure for the relatives. Although I guess that would be relative to your culture, whatever you do in your culture for closure or something like that. But do the monks organize how funerals are put together, or is it just?
And if there's like a high status abbot, I mean, he'll have riders or something. It's like be sure that everything is done this way to make it appropriate or whatever. But yeah, it's just according to the standard tradition. I think that monks get invited. It's the lay people that are doing all the logistics for it. And the monks come and they sit in the prepared seats, and they do the chanting, and then one of the monks will give a sermon generally on impermanence, and maybe the monks will be fed, and offerings will be made on behalf of the deceased, so that just in case he's a spirit that's observing this, he can rejoice, and that will boost his karma and maybe get him into a better plane of existence on the next round. And then they go home. They go back to the monastery.
Get ready for the next event that they're called upon to help out with.
Yeah.
So, what sort of? You said have you attended any other funerals though, in like as an officiant, or have you ever?
The only funerals I've attended are the ones I told you about. There was my friend at the monastery where I stayed at. We had the cremation right there. He was bitten by a snake and died. And then it was my teacher. I went to see his funeral. Went to attend his funeral. And then there were just two like Chinese Burmese lay people in California that we wound up being invited to the funeral just to do the chanting, and just sort of the august presence of the monks kind of uplifts the tone of the ceremony, I suppose.
I can see that. Yeah.
Makes it more of a religious, somber, spiritual kind of an affair, I guess, or is supposed to anyway.
Now you've lived in the States and you've lived in the Far East. Do you think that the people that you spend time with in Asia have a different attitude to death than we have? You mentioned before reincarnation certainly gives them a certain feeling about what the deceased is going. Grandma isn't really gone; she's probably in another room right now. But do you think that the Buddhist ideas help them be better prepared for death than like the average American or the Americans that you know?
Well, I think for starters, just the baseline is we got animal instincts and just fear of death and sort of aversion for corpses and that sort of thing are just built right in. So that I think that would be universal in the human species. But culturally, they're more stoic about death. Yeah, they're just more accepting. I mean, the Burmese are just more, they've got almost superhuman acceptance of situations that Americans would find absolutely intolerable. So there is that. Although they're also afraid of ghosts. A lot of Burmese people are afraid to go through a cemetery in broad daylight, which Americans, I mean, they're not that afraid of cemeteries and corpses and ghosts as Asians are. I guess in Thailand it's that way also. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Well, we've had, I think, in America and in the West in general, I think that there's been a tradition of, well, again, either the whole annihilationist, there's no life after death, therefore there's no ghosts, the atheistical, agnostical outlook. But also even from the religious standpoint, ghosts, I mean, can be easily they're not going to hang around a churchyard because the church drives them off. The holiness of the church will protect you from that sort of thing. And in fact, I think I'm no expert on this sort of thing, but it would seem to me that you would think that you either believe that the body is resurrected and then wakes up and then is judged, or that the soul is in the meantime either in hell, purgatory, or in heaven. So any kind of ghost or anything you see is going to be a lying manifestation of the evil one, or something like that. So I don't think you take a ghost as seriously, maybe, because but I mean, Burmese people must have some, some sort of prophylactics against, ghosts and things like that. They have a lot of amulets and.
Yeah, there are special tattoos and that sort of thing. But I have seen Burmese people just like literally just terrified of like ghosts. Like I lived out in the forest. Sometimes people would have to come and see me at night over some kind of business. I mean, they would just be like literally just like pale and shaking and just terrified because the forest that I lived in was supposedly inhabited by Thiye, which is considered to be a kind of ghost or spirit, but actually it comes pretty close to what in the West is called Bigfoot. They're a big, hairy spirit kind of being that smells bad and lives in forests, and it's pretty much like a Sasquatch, seems to me, but they consider it to be a kind of ghost, which may explain why we've never caught one, is because they can appear and disappear at will.
So no doubt, though, they leave a good monk alone because if you take care of the Dhamma will take care of you, and they see practicing your austerity. So And I don't know if I was a person who was scared of ghosts and Sasquatches and stuff, and I went to see you and I knew you were living in a hole in the ground, surrounded by them, I'd be pretty impressed.
Yeah.
Especially if you had a skeleton sitting out in front of your cave.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one other explanation that I think may have some truth to it is a lot of so-called spirits just were never human to begin with. It's just
Oh,
it's just sort of a more subtle or less physical form of existence that maybe is at the lower end of the spectrum is more crude than humans.
it's sort of like the Western idea of elemental spirits.
Yeah, or like what Kant, like Immanuel Kant wrote a book, Confessions of a Ghost Seer or something like that.
Really, I've never read that. That sounds
Yeah,
interesting.
and he was saying that at some point it will be proven. He doesn't know when, but that the human spirit is just in constant communication with non-physical beings.
Hmm.
And some of the near-death experiences that I've read about were like that. There's one really memorable one. I think it was a soldier who was in a body bag, and he was I guess clinically dead for a short time, and he was just kind of going on a tour of the city, and he was noticing that every person walking down the street had like this funnel of energy kind of coming out of their head, and there'd be all these non-physical beings just hovering all around the people trying to influence their behavior. It's like they don't have a physical body, so they have to kind of parasitize
Right.
somebody who does have a physical body in order to have any effect on the physical world or some such.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's you just take it for what it's worth. I mean, it's just a anecdotal story, but it is kind of interesting.
Well, if there is any sort of reality, quote unquote reality, I don't think we can perceive it directly, but we can, I think, understand the world around us through metaphor and simile. And I've always felt that um, human perception, if you're trying to perceive something, you're going to have to perceive it in the terms that actually make sense to you on every level. And we've talked about this before, where human beings have always interacted with other beings, apparently, of greater power, or at least of apparently otherworldliness. And at one time, we would say ghosts, Sasquatch, ogres. You had your ogre experience. Um,
Yeah.
Today, nobody can really believe that, but they believe in science. So they believe that if there's an advanced enough civilization elsewhere in the galaxy, that this, the old saying, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and it's also indistinguishable from miracle theurgy, if you like. So, we look to space aliens and saucers, and we know people that have taken that path, because you seek to understand the world, and you can only understand it through these metaphors. You can't believe in the Virgin Mary coming. Some people can, of course. There's still Marian apparitions, but I think most people would have a saucer experience. But I think the mechanism is mostly the same. We're trying to touch something or reach something, or it's trying to reach us, and it has to go through that. I'm going to sound theosophical here, but through the veil, that
Yeah.
is going to create, is it's I'm suddenly reminded of Ahab, punched through the everything, or pasteboard masks. We can't really see that directly, but we can perceive it through. And that whole idea of being surrounded by non-physical beings, um, trying to influence us. Actually, it's kind of Dickensian. Remember Christmas Carol?
Yeah, well, actually, it's like New Testamentian, where like everybody and their sister was like possessed by spirits.
Oh yeah, yeah, Gadarene swine. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Put them into the pigs and drive them
my
over.
name is Legion, for we are many.
Aye, aye. Yeah. But I don't know. Well, can you think of anything else as far as I did want to talk about Buddhist attitudes towards death, the what what the treatment of corpses is, the techniques people use for closure in their society. It seems like there's certainly a great deal of local cultural ideas, as there always are, associated with death here. And Buddhism again, that must have been an interesting change from the direct ancestor worship to the idea of reincarnation. And it seems like the appeasement of ghosts is what's kind of left, because that's still left in Buddhism. There are ghost realms, and I
Yeah.
guess there is a certain amount of time sometimes between death and taking up an abode in a new fetus.
Well, I mean, according to Theravada, it has to be instantaneous, but I mean, you
Really?
can, yeah, it's not like the Bardo realms of Tibetan Buddhism, where it's like
Okay.
the very moment that you cease to inhabit this body, the very next moment you've got to take up, you know, what consciousness, what relinking, what I can't remember what it's called. Patisandi in Pali was it's sort of like relinking consciousness where you gotta like boom, you gotta like take a
Oh,
new existence. But I mean, it can be sort of a provisional, temporary kind of existence. So I
cool.
mean, it can work out pretty much the same way. Like if it's your karma to be reborn as an emperor or something, you may have a long wait before that comes around.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So I can see why it's so important to have that good attitude, that good mental state at death. If you're going that quickly, then you're going to go basically where that, or at least to a great degree, where your mental state is directing you.
Yeah. Although
I,
if you spent your life preparing, then there's a good chance that it'll just kick in when the time comes.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I can. I mentioned somebody in some spiritual waiting room somewhere, waiting to be emperor.
Yeah.
It's kind
Yeah,
of
there is one thing that I would say about dying that really it's the monks their most important job is before you die, and or it's not even necessarily the monks. It's like if a person is dying, they're strongly encouraged to remember good deeds that they have done, just so that their mind is on something positive and uplifting at the moment of death.
Hmm. Well, again, I liked how you put that. The monk's job is before death. That's where we have to work, and by the time death's come, that means you're getting ready to start work all over again. Hopefully,
Yeah.
another human body.
Yeah, and again, it's like the monk can only help you after you die if you become a kind of spirit that is inhabiting that area and can actually see and hear what the monk is doing.
Is there any kind of tradition about physical proximity for being reincarnated, or I hear like stories in India where a child remembers a reincarnation. It's usually like a village 30 miles away. Yeah, I was somebody over here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
is
I think it does usually work that way. Like I read like Dr. Ian Stevenson, who did a lot of research on possible cases of reincarnation. He did a study on this one young woman who was born in Burma, and she identified as a man. I guess she was trans, uh,
if you
and
like?
she just swore up and down that in her previous life she was a Japanese soldier who died in Burma.
Wow.
So she was a man in her previous incarnation, which I mean, a belief in reincarnation makes acceptance of like trans people a lot easier because from the Burmese point of view, they're just making a transition from male to female or from female to male, and it's taking more than one life to make the complete transition.
Right, right. But they would still, I would think, say, well, you were male, you are female now. You have to work
Yeah,
with the physical shell that you're confined to this time.
yeah,
It's interesting, and I again suddenly popped into my mind the whole sema soma, the idea the body is a tomb that we have in certain Western mystical traditions, and trying to escape from it ultimately. There are ideas that we originally, we had a starry home, and that we have to work through lives in this world to, well, I free ourselves of the round as a rebirth. Do you
yeah.
think that
That's more Jainism, I think, than Buddhism.
do you think this is like a common idea among mystics all through the European theater, or do you think that there might have been like I guess I'm asking, is independent invention, or do you think there was migration of the idea?
I don't know. I think the human mind has certain characteristics that just human psychology can lead people in different parts of the world towards the same conclusions.
So independent invention rather than a diffusion based
Yeah,
on.
it could be sort of like Jungian archetypes or something, where it's just I don't know. I mean, he would say it's part of the collective unconscious or whatever, but yeah, I don't think there necessarily has to be any kind of cultural connection between, somebody in Europe in ancient times believing that, our soul belongs in heaven and it's just the body is, or our sticky karma is holding it down and we got to purify ourselves so that we can ascend back up into heaven where we belong, that kind of a thing. That
Well,
was apparently the religion of the Indus Valley civilization was somewhat along those lines.
have we found out any more? Did anyone ever translate their writing? You're talking about like Mohenjo-daro and
Yeah, yeah. I think all they've got is seals, and there's just not enough of it that they've ever been able to translate it. Sort of like what is it, Linear A? That
Yeah,
never
they
completely
figured out
translated.
some bits and pieces, I think, of Linear A, but it's yeah, it's far from. There was a guy, Cyrus Gordon. I'm trying to remember stuff from a long time ago. I think his name was Gordon, but he was claiming that it actually a lot of the words in it were Semitic in origin, which would
Oh,
be up to the fact that the Phoenicians were extremely influential. And
but in the Indus Valley civilization.
oh no, I was talking about Linear A.
Oh, Linear A. Oh, okay.
Valley civilization, actually, if I can dig it up somewhere, it was a paper I read online. I haven't thought of this in years, but if it's still out there, I'll send you a link. This one, I think it was a woman who claimed that it was a form of Chinese writing, or not obviously Chinese, but that it was related to the archaic scripts from the bone oracles
Oh,
that you might have heard of, the very, very archaic
yeah. Well,
writing that evolved into Chinese.
I think the Chinese astrology or astronomy, like the Chinese lunar mansions, the asterisms, had a lot in common with that of the Indus Valley civilization also. So there apparently was some kind of cultural back and forth
Yeah, yeah,
through there.
interesting. Well, we're getting pretty far afield here, which might mean that we've more or less exhausted our subject, at least for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, we were talking about dead people though, so
Well,
yeah, but I think we've been going at it for well over an hour, so I guess we should wrap it up.
yeah, and there goes my out the window my idea that we should try to make these a little more succinct and on point.
Yeah.
We'll do a 20-minute video at the most. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like,
that's what you were saying. This one would be maybe half hour at most, but yeah,
well,
we just
we're working on it. An hour is pretty good. We were doing like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes there one time. So
yeah.
pretty good.
All
Well,
right.
thank you for answering my questions. And in the
Yeah.
meantime, I'm going to think of more. I had actually a couple of other things here I'd written down. But maybe we can do another video next week and talk about some of these other ideas I have.
All right.
All right, cool.
Peace.
Peace.